In today's episode of Rob Konrad Conversations, Dr. Rick Strassman.
It starts very quickly, within a few heartbeats. There's a feeling of inner pressure and acceleration, and sound, a high-pitched sound. If you have your eyes open, the room starts to pixelate and break up.
Conducting the first psychedelic drug experiments after a ban of 30 years.
Within about 30 seconds, there's kind of a breakthrough of the sensation of the mind leaving the body. You enter into this world of light. It's composed of bright, saturated, very intense light.
This doctor is sure that he uncovered more than he ever imagined.
You could speculate that DMT modifies the receiving characteristics of the brain mind complex in such a way that it's able to receive information that is real. It's objectively real, but it's usually invisible. The beings, I think, are coalesced information that carry the information that comes from something that is imperceptible.
A fascinating exploration of our brain and our beliefs.
And that's what DMT provides, is a channel or a vehicle or vessel, a perceptible, apprehensible conduit, for what is normally incomprehensible, imperceptible, normally invisible.
Join the conversation now.
Welcome to Rob Konrad Conversations. Conversations with extraordinary people that motivate and inspire, learn, grow, and impact lives. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon for a new conversation every week.
Here comes the sunshine and burns away clouds like they never were.
Hey and welcome, this is Rob Konrad from Switzerland. Today's guest is one of the most eminent authorities in the field of psychedelic research. Clinical professor of psychiatry Rick Strassman has been credited as being responsible for the renaissance of scientific research on psychedelics. After between 1989 and 1995, he performed the first human studies with psychedelic drugs in the US after a ban that lasted over 20 years. His primary focus of interest revolves around DMT. He wrote about his research in the popular book DMT, the Spirit Molecule, which is now in its 15th printing. After stepping back from research, he took some time to dive further into the experiences that he witnessed during the studies, and especially the connection between the repeating and overlapping spiritual patterns that emerged, which ultimately led to this most recent book, DMT and the Soul of Prophecy, in which he discusses the potential overlap of DMT experiences and prophetic religious experiences. He also co-authored the book Inner Paths to Outer Space and is co-founder of the Cottonwood Research Foundation dedicated to consciousness research. I'm glad you found the time to talk with me today. Thank you very much and welcome, Professor Rick Strassman.
Well, thank you, Rob. Thanks for having me on your show today.
Rick, why do we need psychedelic research?
Well, I think for at least a couple of reasons, maybe three. One is that these drugs provide a window into the mechanisms of the mind, how the mind works and constructs its version of reality, both inner and outer. And also there are therapeutic benefits to using the psychedelic drugs in particular ways. And kind of related to the therapeutic would be in terms of enhancing wellness. For example, spiritual practice, creativity, those kinds of things that make people that are already doing well even better.
I see. So for those familiar or not familiar with what DMT is, could you give a quick introduction on what it is and how it differs from other psychedelics like LSD or psilocybin or MDMA? What are the main differences, and in what ways is it better adapted for research than these other compounds?
So DMT stands for dimethyltryptamine. It's a chemical cousin of both serotonin and of melatonin. It's a small molecule. It's the smallest of the classical psychedelics. It's not much larger than a glucose molecule. With respect to its molecular weight. One of the interesting things about DMT is that it's made endogenously in the human body, and it occurs in every mammal that's been investigated so far. And it's found in hundreds, if not thousands, of plants. So it has a very widespread distribution in the natural world. Those are some of the unique properties of DMT. It's also not orally active, which differs from things like LSD or psilocybin. It has to be either smoked or injected or snorted, and that's because it's broken down in the gut very quickly, before it has a chance to enter the bloodstream. And in our study, we gave it intravenously. Usually when, people use it, recreationally, they smoke it, they vaporize it and, then inhale the vapors. DMT occurs in the natural world as opposed to LSD, which is, semi-synthetic. And the time course of DMT is unique. When it's smoked or injected, it begins to work in just a few seconds, and the peak effects occur within a minute or two, and then effects are mostly resolved within a half hour. So that's a lot more. It's a lot more of a rapid time course compared to the orally active psychedelics. And qualitatively, the effect seems to stand out compared to other psychedelics in as much as when you take other psychedelics, you've taken a drug and the effects you're experiencing are related to the drug. It's like you are on a drug and you're viewing the world through a drug modified perspective. A frequent refrain you hear from people that use DMT is that it's as if you're entering into a separate universe, a separate level of reality, which is as real as normal everyday reality. And that isn't a thing that you hear anywhere as frequently with respect to the other psychedelics. And I guess, the other quality of the DMT experience is if you get enough, DMT into you, quite a few people describe, the existence of beings, sentient and intelligent, powerful, I guess, discarnate entities, with which the experience, the person having the experience interacts with. And you can hear reports like that with respect to LSD or, psilocybin, but it's a, very common report when you talk to people that have used DMT.
Before we go into the details of the effects and what DMT seems to do with a lot of people, if you go back in your personal history and your research history, what was the event or what was the trigger that sparked your interest in the psychedelics research?
I think it started, like even before I was interested in consciousness and psychedelics. When I was a kid, I liked to make fireworks. I liked to make bombs and colorful things that exploded. And I even started college as a chemistry major because I was thinking I wanted to to develop my own line of fireworks. And people discouraged me. They told me, well, you're a smart guy and you know how to do medical or scientific work, so you should be you should go to medical school instead, as opposed to starting a chain of fireworks companies. And in college, this was California in the late 1960s, early 1970s. And there was an influx of two major technologies that reliably induced altered states of consciousness, both meditation coming in from the East, and the psychedelic, and the psychedelic drugs. And I was struck, by the overlap in descriptions between the two states. In both states, there were extreme emotions, oftentimes euphoria. There were visions. There were voices. There were new insights into the nature of reality and one's own personality. And people were profoundly affected by both the psychedelic state, as a result of their experience with both the psychedelics and the practice of certain kinds of meditation. So I began to speculate about a biological basis of spiritual experience, that perhaps there was some common biological denominator that mediated both the psychedelic state, in addition to the meditative state. I went to medical school with an interest in studying psychedelics. I trained in psychiatry, and became a psychiatrist in order to study the effects of drugs on consciousness, and to see if there were pharmacological means of attaining meditative enlightenment.
At the time when you started, was there already this ban on psychedelic research?
Well, there is a huge amount of psychedelic research in the U.S. and and in Western Europe, beginning in, I suppose, the late 1940s, with the discovery of LSD by Albert Hofmann in Switzerland. There had been some interest in studying mescaline, back in the day, but it just, never really took off, I think, because you had to give, rather large, doses of mescaline. And frequently, there were, physical side effects like, vomiting, but LSD was extremely potent, like, hundreds, if not, thousands of times potent, more potent, as compared to mescaline. And, that caught, people's interests. In addition, it was quite, it was structurally, similar, to, serotonin, which was, just discovered at around the same time. So there was a link that was being developed between, serotonin, LSD, and, mental illness or, altered states, especially, psychopathological altered states like psychosis. So the field really took off in the 1950s and in the 1960s. Thousands of papers, hundreds of books, dozens of conferences. But then the drugs escaped the lab, as it were, and became a public health problem. And so the Congress in the U.S. Passed the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, which then basically established such a regulatory burden on anybody interested in doing these studies, that new studies, basically stopped. So I, was in college between 1969 and 73. So by the time I started to formulate my interest in these drugs, it was a pretty barren patch in the field, and so our DMT, so our study giving DMT, which began in late 1990, was the first new American study since 1970.
Yeah. So your research didn't start with DMT initially. So you were first researching melatonin?
Yeah, I was interested in the pineal gland. I learned about the pineal gland in college. And, the more I learned about it, the more it seemed interesting, like it might be a spiritual kind of an organ. And it had been revered within esoteric physiology for thousands of years. Descartes believed it was the conduit of the soul. The way in which God communicated with the human mind. So there wasn't all that much known about the human response to melatonin or a human role for melatonin. There were some studies indicating that it could be psychoactive, could be psychedelic even. There was a study in patients with severe depression where it increased the symptoms of depression, even caused psychosis. There was some preliminary data correlating melatonin with the dream state. So because of the emerging physiology and psychopharmacology of melatonin, as well as its esoteric significance, I began my clinical research career looking at melatonin in humans. And I began that study in around 1985. And we looked at it very carefully, and even giving large, doses to humans, it only caused, sedation. There weren't any psychedelic effects. And in the meantime, I learned about DMT, and then, switched, research areas, and began the required paperwork for doing the DMT study in, 1988. And, 2 years later, we, finally got permission to start that project.
Yeah, that was not an easy process. You describe it in quite some detail in your first book, and it really messed with your nerves, I guess, until you got there.
Well, it was an incredibly frustrating endeavor. It took 2 years, but still, it was an important thing to establish, because every other U.S. study which has studied psychedelic drugs employs the regulatory and the bureaucratic model which we established doing the DMT work. It's kind of amusing. The first paper that I published about the DMT work was a paper I like to call "What If I'm Hit by a Bus" paper. It was a step-by-step manual of the way I established communication with the DEA and with the FDA in order to get my project approved. And I wrote that paper, before we published any of the results of the DMT work itself, because if something happened to me, God forbid, I wanted other, I was interested in other, researchers, knowing how I did it, so they could
to pick up where I left it away. Yeah.
Right.
I just want to go quickly come back to the pineal gland, because I found that quite fascinating in your book, and I wasn't aware of that at all. So the pineal gland is actually at least in other animals, in more, let's say, primitive animals, it's some sort of a third eye, if you want to. It's literally some sort of a third eye. So it has some light sensitive properties, and it has some quite unique features even within the brain. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because I found that highly fascinating.
Yeah, the pineal gland is a third eye in lower animals, reptiles and other vertebrates, kind of low down on the evolutionary chain. Yeah, it's on top of the skull in the area where the anterior fontanelle is, in humans or human babies. But in reptiles, snakes, lizards, toads, amphibians, it's a third eye. It has a cornea, a lens, a retina. It's got an iris, and it's directly responsive to ambient light. And in those lower animals, it's responsible for camouflage, coloration of skin, and temperature regulation. In the course of evolution, the pineal gland goes inward, as it were. Like in birds, it goes into the skull, but it still is responsive to light, directly, because the bird brain or the bird skull is quite thin, and light is capable of passing through the bird's skull and still affecting the pineal. When you get, to mammals, it only becomes responsive to light in an indirect manner, through the eyes. There's a circuit which, connects the eyes to the pineal gland. So if you've got no eyes, for example, if you're, blind congenitally, you don't receive any light information. The pineal is, kind of, working on its own. It, requires, light, to, be entrained, to the light and, the dark cycle. So the, primary, hormone's always been, melatonin. That was discovered in the late, 1940s. And it was, determined to be responsible for, seasonal reproduction, in, mammals. And it's also, seems to, mediate, body temperature. Our study established that. And mood as well. Seasonal depression, seems to be, related, to melatonin dynamics.
Okay.
But I was always interested in, does the pineal gland make DMT? I mean, that would be, the obvious thing. If melatonin isn't, psychedelic, and, there is a spiritual, role for the pineal gland. If it made, DMT, that'd be perfect. So I speculated about that. I, wrote a paper in the early 1990s. And in 2013, a, research group in Ann Arbor, Michigan, finally established, that there is, DMT in the living rodent pineal gland.
But only in very small quantities, and the main source in the body is in the lungs of mammals.
Well, the main, source is, probably the lungs. That's been established, or, more or less established, since the mid, 1960s or so. Plus, humans without pineal glands, seem to live normal lives. So if the pineal gland makes DMT, it may only do it occasionally, special circumstances, as it were. There are some published, data, coming out from the group in Ann Arbor, which, hopefully will, see the light of day before, too long, which, demonstrates, DMT in the rodent brain. So I think, once that's established, it will really open up the field a lot, more, than is the case now. One of the arguments against a role for naturally occurring DMT in the human body is its low concentrations. But if it's, made in the brain locally, then it can exert local effects, and even very low concentrations will still be significant.
You described that DMT can actually pass through the blood-brain barrier. So it's one of the very few molecules that the brain actually actively takes into the brain for whatever reason that is, right?
Right. Well, most of the substances which get into the brain occur through diffusion. It's in the blood. It just kind of drifts across the blood-brain barrier. But DMT is unique. Speaking of the unique properties of DMT. Because it's transported into the brain using the brain's energy. The brain expends energy, getting DMT into its confines, and the brain only treats select materials like that, specific amino acids. It's not able to make on its own for protein synthesis. Sugar, glucose in order, to fuel the brain. So it is as if DMT is required for normal, brain function, which is an interesting thing to speculate about if, psychedelic, substance is required for normal brain function, because, because, normal, brain, function, means normal consciousness. So it could be, this is obviously speculative, but it, could be, that certain, window of, DMT concentrations in the brain is required for normal consciousness. What's also interesting is, that, the, so machinery for DMT synthesis is quite active in the retina. So it, could be, that both normal consciousness and in particular visual consciousness is somehow mediated through DMT somehow.
Mm-hmm. And how is it related to LSD and other psychedelics? So they're quite close structurally, right?
They're quite close structurally. Yeah, they're all tryptamines. Psilocybin is a tryptamine. LSD, DMT is a tryptamine. Mescaline isn't quite in the same category, but it still has got the same pharmacological properties, which are to stimulate specific subtypes of the receptor for serotonin in the parts of the brain which you would expect. Which mediate emotion, vision, cognition, volition, those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting as you mention the retina, because a few weeks back I had a very interesting conversation with a guy named Richard Turner. And what Richard Turner does is he's one of the most well-known card mechanics, as he calls it. So he can manipulate cards. He's not a magician in the sense that he does tricks, but he really can manipulate a deck of cards that you tell him, no, you mix the deck, you tell him, I want the 4 aces in the 3rd, the 17th, and the 28th position, and he can somehow mix it so that they end up there. And the interesting thing is he has been blind since he was 9 years old. He lost sight due to some retina malfunction. And when we talked a little bit about how he sees the world in a way, because he seems to have a very... when he got blind, let's put it this way, when he got blind in his teens, initially he didn't realize he got blind. It was only when he was moving his arm in front of his face, he would see the arm, but then he would still see it with closed eyes. So he was thinking, okay, I still see it, although my vision is gone. And what he sees now is, he describes it as he has different color patterns that he sees, so it's mostly blue and red. But what he can do is he can imagine anything he sees things in 2D, but he can imagine them in a 3-dimensional sphere. So he says, like a little bit if you're underwater and see images that are floating and in different layers, let's put it this way. And when he's manipulating the cards, for example, he can see his hands in his inner eye, and he can see the manipulations. So when he does the things, he has to look at his hands to be able to do it. Funny enough, although he did some tests, and he's really there's no way he can see anything. So it's really a physical impairment. And the interesting thing is that the way he sees, so that he has these layers and he can imagine things in 3D, was triggered by a LSD experience he had 50 years back. So that was the only time he took LSD, and that was the event that triggered his ability to imagine things in front of his eyes, and that stuck with him ever since. He never wanted to touch any drugs again or any LSD or anything again, but that was the event that kind of initiated it. So I find it quite interesting that you say is some drugs or some drugs that are produced within our body are produced in the retina, because the retina was actually damaged when he got blind.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's a very strange story. Well, so did he take his LSD after he became blind or before?
After he became blind.
After.
Yeah.
Well, and so did he have visions? I guess he did have visions on LSD when he was blind.
Yes, he did. So he was perfectly normal sighted until he was around, I think, 10 or 11 years old. And then one day when he was sitting in school, he actually realized when he was looking at the the chalkboard, how do you call it in English? The chalkboard?
Chalkboard,
yeah. So the letters were blurry and he couldn't focus anymore. So he was thinking like maybe there's something in his eye or he got kind of an infection. So he went to the nurse, and they realized that his retina is degenerating. And so over the next 10 or so years, or even more, I think 15 years, he continuously lost more and more sight until he was completely blind when he was in his mid-20s.
Yeah, that's called retinitis pigmentosa. My stepdaughter had that. Yeah, it's, your field gets smaller and smaller and smaller until you just can't see anything.
So initially he only had like peripheral vision, so he could see things that he would like hold to the sides of his eyes. He could still see like cards or anything, so he'd still get it's red, it's blue, something, and then kind of that went away after a while. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it may not have been retinitis then. Mm-hmm. Well, like every couple of months, I get an email from somebody asking me if I ever gave DMT to anyone blind, I never really did. There was one gal in the study, who was legally blind, but still had some perception of light, and that only occurred later on in her life. I've heard stories of people that drink ayahuasca, that are blind but became blind as adults, and they're able to walk around the room on ayahuasca in a way they would never have been able to without it. There are some studies from the 50s giving LSD to blind people. I think those are mostly in people who were, it was acquired blindness. They weren't congenitally blind. But, those were kind of crude studies. They really don't go into much, detail. So I would, call those studies inconclusive. If, somebody is, congenitally blind, I just don't understand, or I can't imagine, how they would have, visual perception if they were congenitally, blind, because they would just have no building blocks, no, visual building blocks, no, visual vocabulary, to use, or to, to hang the experience on. But that obviously is a important, research, question when it comes, to, visual, reality, visual perception.
Have you ever received any comments from blind people that have tried DMT that were congenitally blind? So from your, I'm sure you must have been contacted by thousands of people over the years, sharing their experiences.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about congenitally blind. I just don't think I've gotten any emails from people who are congenitally blind. I have probably gotten from acquired blind people, but they just don't stand out. It was the stuff that I've heard isn't surprising when it comes to people with acquired blindness. So it must have been what you would expect. That they still had visual effects. Typical of what would have been the case before when they were sighted.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so interesting. So if anyone who's in that case listening to this and who has been blind from birth and has taken any psychoactive substances, then that would be interesting to share with you, definitely, and get in touch.
Yeah, I would be interested in hearing about that.
Yeah. So coming back to your early research, I think we just maybe can quickly talk about this because not everyone might have read your book, so they might not be familiar with how these studies went. So you got permission by the government to conduct research on human subjects with DMT, and you set up basically a test environment at the University of New Mexico, if I'm not mistaken. To administer it, and after a while you settled on injections. Basically, you tried intramuscular first, but that didn't work out for whatever reasons, and then you decided that the best way and the most effective way to administer it, or a high enough dose that has some noticeable effects, is through injection. So you started giving injections to subjects, and what were the experiences like that these people had?
Well, the question of, the route of administration is interesting. The older DMT studies, which occurred in, Hungary and in the US, gave it intramuscularly.
Mm-hmm.
And the onset is still quite, rapid, but it isn't as, rapid as the smoked route of administration. Mm-hmm. And, because we received our, funding from the National Institute of Drug Abuse, we wanted to, replicate the, field use of the drug as opposed to, the older studies, which were interested in, comparing the state to psychosis, let's say. Mm-hmm. So, there were a small number of, I had a couple of, colleagues, acquaintances, that had smoked, DMT in the past, so I brought them in and we gave, one of those guys, some intramuscular DMT, so he could compare the speed of onset and the, time course, of the smoked as compared, to our, giving it as an intramuscular injection, so he, described it as slower and, not as intense as the smoked route. So, then we applied to FDA to switch, the route of administration from intramuscular to intravenous. The only, previously, published study of giving intravenous, DMT to humans, was a small study in schizophrenic women, in the 60s, maybe the late, 1950s. And those were hair-raising studies. One of the women went into cardiac arrest, and they had to resuscitate her. And
okay,
yeah, so we were kind of fearful about giving IV DMT and began at rather low doses. But the first couple of guys went through the screening intravenous dosing without a hitch. So I was a little bit, I was a little bit overconfident once we, gave our first couple of intravenous doses, and I called FDA and I said, well, people are responding, in a good, they're responding, as expected with, the intravenous route of administration, but I'd like to, go up higher. What do you recommend? And they said, well, you can go up, 2 or 3 times. your current dose. So I said, okay, I'll go up 3 times the current dose, which was a big mistake because
let's start high.
3 times the current, dose, and we overdosed our, 2 volunteers. Yeah, so we, backed it down to, twice the dose, 0.4 milligrams, per kilogram, which is still a pretty harrowing dose. There's a study taking place at Imperial College now in London, giving intravenous DMT, and, they're only giving 0.3.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's a study that's being begun or, formulated, at Yale right now too. And, they're only going to be giving, 0.3. Mm-hmm. 0.3 is a, fully psychedelic dose. And it's, the dose that we used, for our, tolerance study, giving
mm-hmm.
it, 4 times in a closely spaced manner. We, gave our, full dose, in a couple of volunteers for the tolerance study, but it was just, too exhausting, so, we decided to give, 0.3, so, 0.3 is, the current, high dose, at least with, the 2 studies which are ongoing now.
Is that a typical breakthrough dose?
Yeah.
So with DMT, there seems to be a certain level that's needed. So below that level, you will feel effects, but you won't have these, let's say, breakthrough experiences. And if it's too high, then basically you won't be able to remember anything because it's so, whatever it is, no one knows, right? But it's too much. So is 0.3 a breakthrough dose, or is that not for everyone a breakthrough dose?
Yeah, for most people, it's a step above the breakthrough dose.
Okay.
We gave, 0. We gave 0.05, we gave 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and 0.4.
Mm-hmm.
So the small dose, 0.05, lots of people mistook, for placebo.
Mm-hmm.
But if, they could, tell any effects, they're kind of, calm and, relaxing.
Mm-hmm.
0.1 was a mixed, bag. Some people, liked it. It was, like an opiate, and, some people, others described it as MDMA-like, but if,
mm-hmm.
it clearly, wasn't a psychedelic dose, but, for most people, the threshold at which the full effects began, the breakthrough dose was, 0.2 milligrams
mm-hmm.
Per kilogram. And anything, so anything above that was, fully psychedelic.
Mm-hmm. And the reason you didn't administer it through inhalation or through smoking or vaporization or whatever is that it was impractical in a clinical environment and it has some sort of inconvenient smell to it. Let's put it this way.
Well, it smells terrible. That's one thing. It smells like burning plastic. When it's vaporized, and people cough.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an irritant to the lung, which I didn't want to expose our volunteers to.
Mm-hmm.
And, coughing, too, you cough out the DMT before you, completely absorb it. So the absorption, would be a lot sketchier. And, our studies, were occurring on a research unit of a busy hospital. And, it just was impractical.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, once you found let's say the right amount to administer to your test subjects, that's the right way to put it.
Normal volunteers, that's who
volunteers.
They were. They were colleagues and friends early on. Yeah.
So you had around 60 volunteers altogether. So what were the experiences like that people had?
Yeah. Well, about, what to call my volunteers, the research, subjects or the volunteers or the normal
mm-hmm.
volunteers.
Correct.
And, that's an important point. That's an important, point, to characterize, first of all, the volunteer. Still, I was interested in, subjects, that were, familiar with the, psychedelic experience, weren't going to be surprised. I was able to give informed consent in a way that we, shared a language, mescaline, one time, but still, I was interested in, subjects, that were, familiar with the, psychedelic experience, weren't going to be surprised. I was able to give informed consent in a way that we, shared a language, as opposed to, somebody that had never taken a, psychedelic before. So that was, one thing is, they were normal volunteers, they weren't patients.
And
they weren't depressed. They
all
weren't
relatively
dying of
stable
cancer.
mentally. So they were all they had a social network, they had jobs, so they're not like drug users trying to score drugs through a trial, but really they were stable people, mentally stable and let's say emotionally stable, socially stable.
Yeah, I screened them very carefully to make certain that they had a strong support system behind them. They were all employed or in school. Most of them had families. They weren't mentally ill. If they were using any drugs at all, it was occasional marijuana. And there were doctors and attorneys and psychologists and business people and bureaucrats and it was a high functioning group, stable. So that was one thing is the quality or the the characteristics of the volunteers. The other was the expectations, the preparation, for the DMT experiences. If you read about most of the research going on, nowadays, it occurs within a specific kind of a setting. You're given you're given multiple hours of your preparation to experience a particular kind of effect, often called a mystical or mystico-mimetic effect. Because that's supposed to be the salient effect or the most important response that you're looking for if you're depressed or if you've got OCD or if you've got if you have a terminal kind of illness. So you get hours and hours of preparation. You are trained in a vocabulary, conceptual space, a theological model of how the spiritual world operates and what its nature is. You're trained to respond to the contents of the visions and the drug experience in a particular way in order to maximize the likelihood of that kind of experience taking place. So with respect, to the follow-up as well, the experiences are integrated using, that model as well. They're understood after, the fact as either comporting with or not comporting with the spiritual, psychological, model that these studies are, that these studies are using. As compared to our group, where I was interested in could the pharmacology of the drug cause an enlightenment experience, not the pharmacology in combination with a lot of preparation, but just the pharmacology itself. Just give the drug, do people have an enlightenment experience, as opposed to 6 to 8, to 10 hours of, preparation of this is the kind of experience you're going to have. This is what you need to do to get it. This is how to understand it as it's unfolding. If you get off base, this is how you return to optimize the likelihood of that experience occurring. So we just told people it's really fast and you may think that you've died, but don't worry. Nobody's ever died, from DMT. And if your heart stops, we've got a crash cart and a resuscitation team, handy. But just hold on, keep your eyes open, so to speak, your inner eyes, and report back to us what the experience is like. So there wasn't any expectation. They were just scouts. They were the front women, going into where nobody had ever gone before, and I wasn't really wanting to coach them. I just wanted them to describe what the state was like. So that being said, I could describe a typical big dose of DMT. It starts very quickly, within a few heartbeats. There's a feeling of inner pressure and acceleration, and sound, a high pitched sound. If you have your eyes open, the room starts to pixelate and break up. And actually, the first few volunteers, we discovered quickly that they became disoriented if they had their eyes open, because the visions would be overlaid on the room. And it was a pretty sterile, unpleasant room. So we quickly learned to, place eye shades on people. Number one, to, keep them from getting freaked out. And number two, to, make it a more internal kind of experience. There's what we, called the rush, the inner pressure, the acceleration, and anxiety. Those are, physical, symptoms of anxiety. The high pitch, sound, with eyes closed or with eyes open. There's a display of kaleidoscopic, rapidly moving, morphing colors. And within about 30 seconds for most people, there's kind of a breakthrough of the sensation of the mind leaving the body. You lose awareness of your
Mm-hmm.
physical body, your surroundings. The first check of people's blood pressure occurred at 2 minutes after the injection was done, and almost nobody remembered or felt that first blood pressure check, and it was an automatic cuff, which really exerted a lot of pressure on the arm, and they just didn't feel it. So you enter into this world of light. It's composed of bright, saturated, very intense light, and you are, if you've been able, to negotiate, the rush without, resisting it, then it becomes either emotionally neutral or ecstatic. If you resisted the rush, like you fought against it, you screamed, you kicked, you said, I don't want to go, then it was, quite anxiety ridden. But if you could, let go of your anxiety, as best as you could during that first, 30 seconds, then it was, smooth, sailing emotionally after that. So that visual world was huge. It was expansive, and it, contained things, visual things, structures, entities, beings, and, the beings could, take any number of shapes or forms, insects, reptiles, plants, sentient furniture. And even if you, weren't aware of discretely, bounded objects that you could recognize as such, you still were aware of an intelligence and a lot of information which was contained in that state. So I would say, if you wanted to describe what the reaction was, it was just being slack-jawed with amazement and with with a, feeling of awe and, wonder, what is this exactly? So it was, like I described earlier, most of the volunteers described, the reality of this state as, more real than everyday reality. And it was, highly interactive, either with the state itself or with, the beings which could be discreetly recognized in that state. There was give and take, usually take, the beings would, do things or communicate with the volunteers. It was hard for the volunteers to communicate, with those beings for a number of reasons. The language wasn't quite worked out. The anxiety was too great. They were too stunned. The effects would start to diminish, before they really got their bearings within the, the ability to communicate. So things were done to the volunteers. They received information. They were healed. They were threatened and frightened. Usually it was, beneficent, but, like I said, if the experience, began in a scary sort of manner, it, usually would stay that way. The effects would peak, within maybe, 2-3 minutes. And then you start coming down at around, 5 minutes or so. And, time would, dilate. It would, seem as if a very, very, very long amount of, time, was elapsing. It was a, very, common experience for volunteers to say, how long was I out for? And I'd say, about 8 minutes. And they'd say it, seemed like hours, or it seemed like days, or it seemed like years. Yeah. So it was a very strange effect on time. It wasn't, what I expected, though. Like I'm, describing that, highly, highly occupied, interactive state. The kind of state that I was expecting was, the enlightenment state, the Buddhist Kensho, Satori, the white light of enlightenment. No form, no feeling, no sensation, no consciousness, no body. And in our, nearly, 5 dozen volunteers, only one person, had that kind of experience. And it was interesting. It wasn't a white light. It was a yellowish light. And, number 2, this guy was, hoping for that kind of an experience. In college, he was a religious studies major, as a, physician. He was, interested in esoteric psychology, esoteric spiritual systems. So of the large group of volunteers, many of, whom were, deeply involved with, meditation practices, were, hoping for an enlightenment experience, were expecting one. And so was I. I was expecting an enlightenment experience as well, because I was coming at it from years of Zen practice and study. But only one, volunteer had that kind of experience. The rest of the, volunteers, had experiences which were consistent with, who they were, or who they wanted to be, or what they hoped to be the case, or they learned more about things that they were already, somewhat convinced of or uncertain about, but were thinking of because they were important in the, front of their mind, the back of their mind, the middle of their mind, but they were, a psychedelic version of themselves, and the experiences were a psychedelic version of their hopes, their fears, who they were, their pre-existing personality structure, as opposed to a pure pharmacologically induced white light experience.
Okay, but in most cases, at least, there was still a sense of ego. So people were not dissolved into, I'm everything and everything is me. But there was a differentiation between the self and the others. Let's put it this way.
Yeah, there was still the the maintenance of the personality, the observing ego. And in some ways, the personality and the observing ego were purer, more focused, more concentrated, like a distillation of themselves, as opposed to the obliteration of themselves. They felt expanded, because the DMT universe, as a rule, is very large. But they still observed, and they could report, they could remember, they could interact. So the ego, dissolution, the merging into the white light, that only occurred in that one, fellow, and that was only for a brief period of time, maybe 30 seconds, 45 seconds or so. So it, wasn't what I was expecting and hoped for, and it wasn't what the majority of the volunteers were hoping for.
Okay. At that time,
or expecting.
At that time, did you have did you have the DMT experience yourself? So that you had something to base it on, or?
Well, that's the question I'm asked often. Like, have you done DMT? And my stock answer is, if I answer yes, I'm accused of being a zealot, and if I answer no, then I'm accused of not knowing what I'm talking about. So I kind of sidestep that question. The point of my studies, too, wasn't necessarily to confirm my own DMT experiences or lack thereof. It was to gather the reports of a sophisticated group of volunteers and establish a cartography to map out the territory.
I see. So I guess you would answer the same thing if I would ask you about other psychedelic experiences that you might or might not have had.
Yeah. I usually give the same answer. Yeah, it isn't about me and my, drug experiences. I mean, those are just as interesting or just as boring as anybody else's. So,
it's more from the perspective of
I was interested in, what happens when you give IV DMT to people, and that was my study.
Okay, now it was just more from the background of, did you have any foundation to base the reports on? So was there anything like they say, okay, that sounds familiar, or that sounds completely new because I haven't done it. So that was the background of the question, but I can see why this is a complicated thing to answer. So let's not dig deeper into that.
Right, but it's an important question, because I'm asked it, with some regularity. But yeah, I mean, our study, like I said, was a study of intravenous, DMT in a group of, sophisticated, volunteers. And, could I compare? Yeah. The validity of the study, its importance, the information we came back with, I think that speaks, for itself. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned, might have a bit of a sidestep in the beginning, that in your very young ages you started an interest for, let's say, experiences. Did you ever have any, let's say, otherworldly experiences of some sort as a kid that might have influenced you in your interests? Did you have, some people have near-death experiences, others have religious experiences. Did you have anything that might have formed you or sparked your interest in these kind of studies? Any events or any maybe repeating incidents?
Well, sparking is a good term, because, like I mentioned earlier on, for some reason I was really, interested in, fireworks, the colors would be spectacular. This was back in the 50s and the early 60s, and you could just go to the library and check out books on bombs and fireworks. So I went to the library, checked out books on bombs and fireworks, and you could just call these chemical companies, or you could write them and say, I'd like the ingredients for X, Y, and Z, and they say sure, and they ship all these pounds of chemicals to me. And I was like, whatever, 12, 14 years old. So I made, bombs, and I made, fireworks, and I really, loved, the feeling too. Like, I thought, or I felt, this is really exciting. It's, kind of dangerous. It's really spectacular. The, visual effects, are really fascinating. The power, behind, the chemical reactions was, really impressive and, really novel. I think too, my dad was a real, fan of, science fiction, and, and I would, read through his, books, during summer break. And I was interested in, science fiction, other worlds, time travel, space travel, strange creatures, the brain, consciousness, so I suppose, even, from, the get-go, I was always interested in, fantastic things. And in, some ways I got the last, laugh on people who said, don't go into fireworks, because, I just, went into fireworks, but more, on an internal level, as opposed to, making, bombs, someplace
and being
overseas.
an overall safe hazard. Safety hazard.
Right.
Safety hazard, yeah. So when you received the first reports, and they were kind of overlapping in the quality of the experience, were you surprised? Because there was some earlier research or earlier studies done in the 50s. Did they have similar reports about what people experienced, or was that completely surprising to you?
Well, there were some studies of DMT in Hungary and in, the U.S. And if you, go back and you track down those reports, they're quite comparable to what our volunteers reported. Seeing entities, seeing beings, the interactive quality, things being, done to the volunteers, by the DMT beings. Those are pretty obscure, papers, but, compared, to the huge number of LSD research papers that were out there, smaller number of, psilocybin papers, the DMT reports, stood out, as, being unusual in a way that was, consistent with the reports of our, volunteers. So, before we began the study, I interviewed about 20, recreational or, field users of DMT. Most of them were in California. I guess that wasn't, surprising, but, I, spoke to these, folks on the phone, and I said, well, I'm about to start a DMT study, tell me what to expect. And they said, expect entities, expect, beings. So, combined with those reports from my informants and the reports from the previous, scientific papers, I ought to have not been surprised, by the frequency of, being, contact, as it were. But I think it's just, one of those things you're, blinded, by your own, preconceptions, and you'll ignore, the evidence to the contrary. So I was expecting a white light experience, and I, forgot about, the beings. I just forgot about them. But it, wasn't until like report after report after report from my volunteers that I started to, to remember, oh, right, that's what everybody was telling me. And that's what the older papers said too. So it's a, good, case of the anti-placebo effect in a way, because, they were expecting one thing. I was expecting, the same thing, but on the contrary, it just was, what it was.
Mm-hmm. So that's one of the ways in which DMT differs from other drugs is that even in a relatively sterile setting, like a clinical room without any decorations, with blindfolds on and stuff, the experiences were quite similar to each other. Whereas with other psychedelic drugs, the setting plays a huge role. As you said, preparation plays a huge role and might lead you to completely different end results. So DMT seems to give a very, let's put it, consistent experience across many different people with many different levels of psychedelic experiences.
Yeah, well, that, kind of, touches upon, the, role of placebo and of, suggestion, when it comes, to the nature of the, drug effect. I think with, medium doses, not too low, not too high, that's, where you are, seeing the, the maximal, response to placebo and, suggestion. You're, most amenable or most responsive, to the coaching that you get beforehand. If, the doses are, very small, they're, kind of meaningless. Well, it's, microdosing, which is a, different story. And if you give a, very large dose, it's, mostly the drug, kind of, working on the pre-existing personality, as opposed to, what you've been, what you've been, coached to, have take place or occur in the drug state. So I think with a large, dose of DMT with no preparation other than it's, fast, you may think you've died, but you didn't, just report back. Yeah, we're, seeing the pure, pharmacological effect. And that's, pretty consistent across volunteers. It's, disembodied. It's very visual. It's very interactive and relational. It isn't the unitive, mystical white light experience very often at all. Yeah, so it's, it's the, pharmacology of the drug is, I think, I'm outweighing anything else. With, medium doses, you're more able to, manipulate, the effect, and the tiny doses are a, different story.
Mm-hmm. So before we kind of transition into your second book and especially the experiences in relationship to prophetic experiences, put it this way, what was the overall results of the study and why did it end 1995?
Well, the overall result, was we, gave a lot of DMT to a lot of people. And, we both characterized the, psychological responses, in, two ways. One was, through the development of a new, rating scale, paper and pencil questionnaire. Which we developed, we developed that questionnaire, based on, Buddhist, psychological principles, the Abhidharma psychology of, Buddhism, which, breaks mental experience, down into a manageable number of components. So it was a, phenomenological description of the state, focusing on, a small number of categories, perceptual effects, emotional effects, physical effects, and so on. And also I took a lot of bedside notes, which was the, source of the material for the DMT book. Like 1,000 pages of bedside notes. So we characterize the subjective effects both objectively, using the questionnaire, and subjectively with me taking notes. And we also characterize the biological effects based on serotonin physiology. So we looked at heart rate and blood pressure and pupil diameter, body temperature, a slew of hormones, beta, cortisol, ACTH, beta, endorphin, growth hormone, a large, number of, hormones. It's interesting in, that respect is, all the hormones that we measured went up except for melatonin, so the pineal gland, seemed to be, kind of immune to even a monstrous, dose of DMT, which was, I'm not exactly sure what to make of that, but it is, kind of ironic with all of the focus and energy on the pineal that it didn't, budge in response to a large dose of DMT. So we characterize, dose responses of, DMT in our volunteers, which, means that small doses had small effects, medium doses have medium effects, and so on. So we also, looked at, tolerance, to DMT. When it comes to other psychedelics, you give LSD every day. After about 3-4 days, you stop, feeling the effects, pretty much. And there's cross tolerance too. So if you're tolerant to, to LSD, you're not going to respond to, psilocybin. Let's say if you've, taken LSD, every day for, 5 days or so. But, DMT, at least in the, the older studies, with DMT in both humans and animals weren't able to establish any tolerance or cross tolerance. So I was, and, there was one study in humans where they gave DMT, I think, twice in a day for maybe, 4 days or so, 5 days, and there wasn't any tolerance. In other words, the response, to DMT was, was the same. There wasn't any, diminution in the effects. And, there was a cat study where they gave it every 2 hours for 21 days, and there was no tolerance. So I thought, well, if there's no, tolerance, to DMT, that would be unique. And it would also point to a, role of DMT in both normal and abnormal mental function. Because if, DMT is, having an effect on the brain-mind complex, you would think it has to be, having an effect all the time. As opposed to, well, it stops, working after a few hours, and it's, it stops, playing a role. So, I was, thinking that you needed to space the injections, closer together. And perhaps if you, gave it every half hour, which is when, the effects, more or less stop after a single dose, you would, give a big dose, then it would, drop off, then you give another big dose. So we gave a large dose, 0.3, which is slightly, less, than our maximum dose, 4 times in the morning, and the spacing was a half hour. And we demonstrated no tolerance. The, fourth, dose, caused the same intensity of, mental effects as the first dose. So, DMT, we established, is still unique among the classical, drugs, and, not, developing, tolerance after repeated administration.
Could you drip feed it and keep a constant level?
Well, yeah, the continuous infusion question is key. And that's one of the issues that I, pose at the end of the DMT book, is if you can't, develop tolerance, perhaps a continuous infusion, either number one, would establish tolerance, or number two, if it didn't, it would, provide a very interesting, a very interesting response. It would, it would, provide a, long-term or more extensive or more expanded, DMT effect. One of the, problems if you are interested in, doing psychotherapy, let's say with, DMT, is quite, hard, to relate, to people when they're in the throes of a big, DMT experience. Mm-hmm. You can work with them after the fact. And, we did. I'm a psychotherapeutically, trained, psychiatrist, so I was able to, work with, people when, difficult emotional issues, might come up. But still, it was all after the fact. And if you could, keep, somebody in a continuous, DMT state, you could work with them, psychologically a lot more easily than you could with just one big shot or even, repeated, big doses. It was interesting. In the, tolerance study, people were able to do a lot more psychotherapeutic work, even though that wasn't the intent of the study, because, there was a lot of, continuity mm-hmm. between trips, so the first, DMT experience in the morning was, kind of being, reintroduced, to the state. The second trip was, stuff would, come up like emotional things, conflicts in their lives, spiritual mm-hmm. questions. And it would be, and, the third experience, was oftentimes extremely difficult. They were, kind of, caught in between and betwixt, resolution and, not. They were mm-hmm. just kind of stuck. And, oftentimes, the volunteers after, coming out of the, third dose would say, has anybody ever, dropped out at this point? And I'd say, not yet. And,
okay.
They would say, oh,
no peer pressure,
okay, I'll do the fourth.
Okay.
Right. Well, yeah, nobody wanted to be the, first one to, chicken out, so to speak. Yeah. And, for everybody, the, fourth, dose was great. It was like a, resolution of all of the other material that had been unearthed and stirred up during the first, 3 doses. So it, seems that you can do, psychotherapy with, DMT, but the logistics are a bit strange. And if you could, keep, someone in the DMT state for 3 hours or 6 hours mm-hmm. or, 7, 8 hours, that would be useful. And with the, short half-life of DMT, you could, crank it up and you can crank it down. Mm-hmm. So if, somebody is interested in spending some time, talking to you in a, less than completely altered state, you could lower the dose, but you could still keep them in it. Or if they say, well, I, really want to work on this, give me all mm-hmm. you've got, then, they could, go into that state for 15 minutes, a half hour, and, then you could bring them out of it and then, work with them, psychotherapeutically around the material, that emerged in that, super high dose state. So I think it would, provide a lot of flexibility, a lot of, dynamic, quality to the interactions, mm-hmm. Which isn't available with, single doses of DMT and, really isn't available with a long-acting oral drug like, psilocybin or LSD, because you just can't, titrate, the effect at a, moment to moment or, minute to minute, kind of time course.
So why did you not do this kind of experiments? Was it something that wasn't planned in the design and so wasn't approved, or?
Well, that kind of, touches upon, why the study ended when it did. Mm-hmm. I approached, the drug study through a straight, forward, psychopharmacology model.
Mm-hmm.
What's the, pharmacology of the drug, and what is the, psychology of the drug, and, how do they interact? But I was interested in both the spiritual and the psychotherapeutic effects of, psychedelics as well. So, I was, hoping that, there would be collaborators who would, join me in Albuquerque to start, doing those kinds of studies, colleagues that I had been, consulting with over, that I had been, consulting with over the years. But, nobody was all that interested in, leaving where they were at and, making the move. So I was kind of, boxed into a, pharmacological, corner, as it were. And the, psychopharmacology model is, once you've established the effects of the drug, you start to, look at the specific receptors in the brain which are responsible for specific effects. So luckily our first blockade study, as it were, turned out to be a, magnification study. We, gave a, serotonin, blocking drug, and it increased the effects of DMT by a factor of, 2 or 3. Mm-hmm. So, people volunteered for that study, that was no, that was no, problem. And, it was, very interesting results. But, when we then started to, look at, actually, suppressing the DMT effect, I began to feel, not that, great about, the research. Like, I don't want to block the DMT effect. I want to either enhance it or utilize it. Mm-hmm. So it was increasingly, difficult to recruit volunteers for blockade studies. And I wasn't, feeling that great about, treating my volunteers as large lab rats, as it were. Mm-hmm. And there weren't any, collaborators that were, joining the, the team to, branch out into more, psychotherapeutic avenues. So, in the meantime, I had, basically, gotten the answer, to my original question, which is DMT inherently spiritual? Mm-hmm. And, the answer was no, it's not. It just amplifies the individual personality and all that, goes into the personality, rather than, having an entheogenic or mystico, mimetic effect. Mm-hmm. It's a, psychedelic. It's a mind manifesting drug. It's not a mystical mimetic drug. If you coach, people to have a mystical experience, then they will, but that is a, combination of the drug and the preparation, as opposed to, just the drug itself. So, so we, basically established that, DMT was, psychedelic, mind manifesting, mind disclosing, and without any extra, manpower to, take the research into a, different, field or, different arenas. I had basically, gotten the answer that I was, seeking. We had also, we had also begun some work giving psilocybin. And we gave very large, doses of, psilocybin and some dose finding work. We gave 1.1, milligram per kilogram of psilocybin. And if you look at the large dose or the high dose, psilocybin studies going on now, they're about 1/3 of that, 0.4, 0.45. So when people talk about high dose psilocybin work, that was the threshold for psychedelic effects in our volunteers. We started with some small doses, medium doses, big doses, but it wasn't until we got to 0.45 milligrams per kilogram that, people said, okay, this is a psychedelic dose of psilocybin. Mm-hmm. So we also gave 0.7 milligrams per kilogram, and the volunteers mostly said we could do more. So I, gave a couple of volunteers, 1.1, which was a 50% increase, which was too much. It caused people to get delirious, and they were just uncomfortable. So if we were going to have run that full psilocybin study, our big dose would have been 0.9 milligrams per kilogram. So that still is two times what's considered a high dose now, which bespeaks the issue of medium doses being ideal for placebo enhancement, and the higher doses being more consistent with the pure pharmacologic effect. So in our psilocybin work, it would have been the same model as the DMT work. We'll give big, medium, and small doses and just characterize the state. But for DMT, that was okay. 45 minutes. But for psilocybin, it's 6 hours, 8 hours, and for somebody to just report back in every hour or so, just really wasn't cutting it. And one of the volunteers had a very negative reaction, fled the ward, the security guys in tow. So it just didn't really seem all that worthwhile to continue the psilocybin work in the DMT kind of model. Just give the drug and watch volunteers. We also got, permission to begin an LSD study, and, we got LSD, we had LSD in Albuquerque, but after the, psilocybin experience, it just didn't really seem, prudent, to, move into LSD work. We were interested in, taking the studies off, site, like into a comfortable house, near the campus. But because of that response to that one, response in the one volunteer who fled the hospital, our, the ethics board, said, on the contrary, these aren't, safe drugs. You need to be in the hospital. So, at that point, I just said, well, I've learned what I really entered the research wanting to learn. The risks of the studies with the longer acting drugs didn't really, seem to be worth, the potential benefit. So I just thought, well, I'll just, close up shop and, start to work out what I actually, discovered in those 5 years of giving DMT.
So what happened after you closed that research project in 1995, and still there were some questions that were unanswered, I suppose?
Well, yeah, I mean, there were a number of reasons the research ended. At one level, I had gotten the answer that I was, seeking, and I wasn't prepared to, take the work into psychotherapy or spiritual pursuits. And there were other factors as well. My wife at the time, developed some, localized cancer. And wanted to return to Canada, which where she was from. So we closed up shop and moved up to British Columbia for a number of years, to help her recover. And our youngest was also struggling in school, so we wanted to help him out and get him through high school. So we moved up to Canada, for a while. And in addition, I was getting, some pressure, from, my religious community. They, thought I was, tinkering, with, spirituality.
So at that time you were, maybe that's important, I think we didn't mention it, you were part of a, Buddhist group, and had been so for over 20 years, I think.
Yeah, I had, I studied, Buddhism in college a bit, I learned, transcendental meditation when I was 20, I think. And then at Stanford, I took a course on Indian Buddhism in, 1972, 1973. Then I started, meditating, Zen meditation in, 1974. So by the time I had started the work with DMT, I'd been, part of that community, that, Zen Buddhist community for about, 16 years or so. During that period of time, I was, discussing my interest in enlightenment and, psychedelics with the monks. And it was interesting, the majority of the monks at the time got their first glimpse of enlightenment on an LSD trip. And I, like every opportunity I, got when I was, when I was alone with one of the junior monks, I would ask them, well, did you ever take LSD? And almost all of them said yes. And, then I would say, well, how important was your LSD experience, to your becoming a monk? And they said, I wouldn't have become a monk if I hadn't taken LSD. So, it, supported, my kind of initial, notion that, there was a relationship between, Buddhist practice, Buddhist meditation, and, the psychedelic state. So I think, what the disclosure from the monks about the importance of LSD in their spiritual, lives, wasn't maybe as much as the drugs, kind of, triggering an enlightenment state, as much as, giving them a glimpse of, some other way of looking at reality. What's called, there's a expression in Buddhism called, bodhicitta, which is the initial, thought of enlightenment, the seed of an enlightened life or an enlightened mind. So that, I think, was what, they were describing, was that their LSD experiences were like were an experience of, bodhicitta, which, then encouraged them to become Buddhists and train, find a teacher, live a monastic life. And, then, build on, that, on that flash, that, kind of initial flash. So, so over the, course of all those years, I continued to discuss with the monks, my interest in, psychedelics and, the overlap or the influence or the interdependence or, the mutual influencing, of those, two states, within the person. And I was encouraged to, go deeper. That was, kind of one of the mantras there was, go deeper. But, once I actually, began the studies and started writing about them, and especially an article that I published in a, Buddhist magazine called Tricycle, where I explicitly, make the comparison and start, connecting the dots between, Buddhist practice, bodhicitta, the enlightened state, the DMT state, the psychedelic effect. Then once the rubber hit the road, as it were, the monastic community felt they had to distance themselves from me and my ideas. So there was some pressure coming from them as well to stop doing the research. So I guess there were three factors. The religious community one, my wife's, health, family issues, and, scientific ones. So I stopped the studies in 95, moved up to Canada, and then started to, try to make some, sense of my volunteers' reports. Especially the interactive relational quality of the DMT effect, as opposed, to the unitive mystical white light one, which I was expecting, and the feeling that it was more real than real. Those were, two, findings that really struck me. I was really impressed with, both of those aspects. So I started to, look around for, models. The models that I had, brought to bear on the original studies were three. One was the, psychoanalytic. This is, the, DMT, visions and voices were just repressed, memories, repressed, conflicts or impulses. That were then, kind of actualized in the mind. The other, model was the, psychopharmacology model. This is your brain on drugs. And, the other, model, was the Buddhist model, which at least, from the, Zen perspective, also, treated the, the visions, and the voices as, secondary. They weren't the, primary goal. Of one's spiritual quest. So all three of those, models, characterized the DMT effect as, less real than real. It was a step down, from reality. But in our volunteers, it was more real than real. So I started to, look around for, models that would be consistent with, DMT providing entry into a more real than real, subjective experience. A more real than real, subjective universe. So I started to, root around, new, physics, dark matter, parallel universes, dark energy. So those, were interesting. I mean, you could speculate that DMT modifies the receiving characteristics of the brain mind complex in, such a way that it's able to receive information that is real. It's objectively real, but it's usually invisible.
So in a way, like tuning it into a radio station that you haven't previously discovered, and the waves are out there. It's just like a different wavelength that we haven't discovered yet, but it's still there. DMT would basically tune us into that frequency, if you wish. So to give a more practical example of that.
Yeah, you're kind of changing the tuning of consciousness to be able to perceive things that you normally don't. Like a telescope. All those things are out there in outer space, but you just can't normally see them without an enhancement of the mind-brain complex with the technology of a microscope or a telescope or what have you. And the brain is way more complicated than any machine we've ever built, so it makes sense that if you profoundly modify the the functioning of the brain mind complex, you'd be able to perceive things that that are extant. They're real, they're externally objective. But you can't normally.
This is not in a way a perspective that's really esoteric and very, woo-woo in the worst kind of sense. But it's really like saying, okay, look, we 50 years ago, we didn't have microwaves. Now we have microwaves. We didn't ever imagine that we would have the ability to use a little flat device and talk to anyone on this planet. Now we have it because there is stuff out there that we didn't know existed 50 years ago. So it was really from a purely scientific perspective that you made these thought experiments. So it wasn't like, okay, I'm trying to find some some reasoning for it, but it was a purely scientific approach.
Right. But the analogy in a way breaks down, because we're looking at, we're, looking at, purely subjective effects.
Mm-hmm.
So with respect to a microscope or, in terms of a telescope, like anybody can look through a microscope or look, through a telescope, and you can take pictures, that you could look at, with a microscope or a telescope. But, still, it isn't a completely, worthless analogy, because everybody dreams and everybody knows what a dream is like, and everybody can compare dreams. You can't look at somebody else's dream, but the experience of, dreaming is an established, fact that, people can compare notes and say, yeah, I dream, and this is the nature of my dreams. And somebody will say, well, I dream too, and this is the nature of my dreams. And you build up a, consensus reality version of dreams, as it were. One of the things I like to, kind of joke about speculatively is, maybe, one day there'll be, cameras or imaging collecting devices that can, collect images of what's in dark matter. And, you could take a picture and you could show it to, somebody, and, they would say, oh, that's just like what happens on, DMT. But, obviously, that's a long way ahead in the future, if ever that kind of, technology would, would appear.
Can you talk a little bit about the dark matter example that you're giving? Because maybe not everyone is familiar with what dark matter is and how it could be a piece of the puzzle.
Well, so dark matter is dark. It's invisible. It neither generates light or reflects light. But it explains a very large percentage of the universe's mass. You can tell that the mass is there because it exerts gravitational effects, and they've calculated that 90% of the mass of the universe is invisible. Dark matter. There's a there's a notion of what's called dark energy too, which I'm less familiar with. And there was a paper just came out a few weeks ago about a dark fluid, which somehow combines dark matter with dark energy.
Okay.
But in any event, it's stuff out there which is invisible, but still it exerts effects, and it's the majority of the mass in the universe. So if it's the majority of the mass of the universe, it has to occupy space. If it occupies space, it must contain contents. So what's to keep you from imagining that the contents of dark matter, the dark universe, couldn't be at some level or at some point in time perceived? And they're building these incredibly expensive, complicated detectors for dark matter. The fundamental particle of dark matter is called a neutrino. They're developing these detectors, for neutrinos in these huge, deep, tunnels under Earth. So they're kind of, closing in on neutrinos, but, the obvious place, to go if you're looking for the most sophisticated machine in the universe is our brain. So it, seems to me, there ought to be, more emphasis, placed on that, than, building these huge clunky machines.
So the idea was that maybe there is this dark matter. There is, let's put it this way, a different world out there that we cannot perceive in this reality that we live in. But maybe DMT somehow opens up like a channel or gives us the ability to interact with that different layer of reality.
Right. It's a, working hypothesis. I mean, obviously it's, beyond speculative, but still, it's a working, hypothesis. I think you could design experiments with a working hypothesis like that. The experiments would be complicated and might not be able to be accomplished for, hundreds of years maybe, but, still, I think it's a reasonable avenue, to pursue. But, in the meantime, I was more thinking along the lines of other ways to look at the DMT effect, which wouldn't require the, building of new machines, but, could instead be, focused on, what we've got at hand at the moment, which is our, mind-brain, complex. So the other, way of looking at states of reality which are normally invisible are the religious disciplines out there. They've been looking at spiritual realms which are usually invisible. They use altered states in order, to access those normally invisible states. And that they've been, working, working all along to extract useful information, from those states. One of the, drawbacks of a purely, mechanistic approach, to the, DMT effect specifically and the, psychedelic state in general is, what is, the meaning and the message that's contained in those states. And the, scientific models are, more concerned, with the nuts and bolts, with, how those things work or come to pass. But, what they're good for, isn't, as important an emphasis. And, the religious, traditions, for millennia, have been, more or as much interested in, what they're good for. What can you learn from those states that you can't, normally, learn from everyday consciousness. So, I, rooted around, shamanism some, and, one of the strengths of, the shamanic model is, they do, attribute as much reality or even more so, to the normally invisible states, which are, made perceptible, when you're under the influence of a psychedelic. And, they also extract, valuable, tools, there's healing that's involved, in, the shamanic model. But, it's a, non-Western model. It's, not theistic, which I think if it's going to really gain, traction in the West, it, needs to incorporate God. They, incorporate spirits, spirits of plants, celestial spirits, but they don't, really, take it, like above the spirits, like, who, created the spirits, who controls them, what's the information that is being transmitted or transmuted through the spirits, where does that come from? And also, shamanism is, I think, is still kind of ethically challenged. It's all, Stephen Beyer wrote a book called Singing to the Plants, where he has a really great line in there. It's about, Colombian shamanism. And, he has a line in there, saying there are good shamans and bad shamans, but they're all bad shamans. And, what he, means by that, is, their whole, model of, health, and, disease and healing. Their, model is if you're sick, it's because you've been cursed by a bad shaman. And if you, heal somebody, you're, turning that, curse away, from the person, and you're returning it, to the bad shaman. So it instantly becomes aggression, counter-aggression, black magic, witchcraft, machismo to the max, fueled with ayahuasca or other psychedelics. I know a shaman in a Latin American country. He's a European and he's lived there forever. And he told me in the state where he lives, in 1 year, 12 shamans were murdered by other shamans. So it's an ethically challenged field and an ethically challenged model. And that isn't to say that Buddhism isn't ethically challenged, or the Western religions aren't ethically challenged, but you would hope that any other model would at least be comparable or an improvement over the Western model.
So what about
shamanism? Buddhism is good in some ways because it studies very carefully the contents of the mental states that are induced through meditation. And I suppose if I had been trained in the Tibetan tradition, I may have been more keen to continuing my investigations into Buddhism and the DMT effect, because a large amount or a number of schools within the Tibetan schools are focused on visualization and the deities and interacting with the contents of those highly altered states brought about through chanting or breathing, visualizations. But the school in which I was trained, the Zen school, the Soto Zen school, is very down to earth, or else it's completely rarefied. So when it speaks about the enlightened state and the visions that are on the way to the enlightened state, they tend to disregard the visions and the voices, considering them kind of flotsam and jetsam, kind of unreal, material which is being shed on the way toward the desired unitive state. So they don't really put much credence in the reality of the effects which the DMT volunteers were so impressed with the reality of. And also at a purely personal level, I was discouraged within my community to pursue it any further. And after a certain point, we parted ways. So in a way, that gave me a license to return to my own spiritual roots. I was born and raised, Jewish. And I had, read a little bit of, the Bible when I went to Hebrew school as a kid. But as a result of being, cut loose, from the Buddhist, fold, I could then start, reading the Bible again, from an adult perspective, and also, from a Zen perspective, to be able to, kind of, not be so swayed by, my, by my reactions, to the material in the text. Either my, cognitive, reactions like, this makes no sense, or, my emotional, reactions like, this really pisses me off. That was, one of the, things that was a, very, useful consequence of my, Zen training, was it allowed me, to return, to the Hebrew Bible with some equanimity. and some spiritual maturity. So for a number of reasons, I started to dig into the Hebrew Bible. One of the reasons being that, well, perhaps there's a spiritual model in the Hebrew Bible which is more consistent with the DMT effect, as described by my volunteers. So I began reading the text, and as time went on, I began to notice this thing called prophecy, which started to resemble, or started in my mind to look more and more like the DMT effect. And when I use the word prophecy, it's a lot more expansive version than what's usually used as the understanding of the term in the West nowadays. Usually when you think of prophecy, it's within the setting of predicting or foretelling the future. But that's more of so that's kind of an artifact of the Greek translation of the word for prophecy, which appears in Hebrew. The Hebrew word for prophecy, or for the person of the prophet, is navi, and the root, when you look at it, is usually translated as interpreter or spokesperson, or or to be elevated is another translation of the root of navi, or even to bubble up. But the notion of foretelling isn't built in to the Hebrew word navi. But the Greek translation of the Bible from Hebrew translated the word navi prophetes, which means to see ahead, which is consistent with the Greek idea of divination. The divine helped you divine. You could foretell through your contact with the spiritual world. So when spiritual experiences were described in the Hebrew Bible as nevuah, or the experience of a navi, it was translated by the Greek into the term prophetes. So prophecy then became associated only with foretelling and predicting. But if you consider prophecy in the Hebrew Bible as any spiritual experience, then it really opens up the field of study. Because it could be inspiration, it could be kind of divinely endowed courage, it could be creativity, it could be any altered state. Like if you open the first, book of, or if you open the, book of Ezekiel, the first, chapter, it's an incredibly psychedelic experience. Very DMT-like, visions, and voices, out of body experiences, very strong emotions, paralysis. He, falls down. There's, the, sound of roaring waters. There's ice that's above him, blue, white ice. There's lightning, there's wheels, there's eyes, there's wings. So, it wouldn't, necessarily, be, well, in the future, this, and that is going to happen. It could be anything that is a spiritual experience,
so
which can cover a huge gamut.
So at that time, were you still considering what you called the bottom-up approach? So that basically, whatever, let's put it, holy scriptures are basically a reflection of the experiences that people had through psychedelics, or were you already at the stage where you said, okay, that might be what you called a top-down approach? So that's basically DMT is the tool that's higher beings or a god or whatever you want to call it uses to communicate with us.
Yeah, well, the top down versus the bottom up model questions I really wasn't considering at the time. I was more trying to find a spiritual experience that was like the DMT one, both content wise, like the visions and the voices, in addition to being considered as real or more real than everyday reality. I started the model building after toward the end of the Prophetic States book, when I started to look at a biological explanation for the prophetic experience. So in the beginning of my I should explain that the Prophetic States book, DMT and the Soul of Prophecy, which came out in 2014, was the end of 16 years of study. I mean, it was a backbreaking endeavor. And actually, after I finished the study, I got really sick for a year. It just it completely spent me. Both mind and body and spirit were just completely depleted. So it was a long process, and it wasn't easy to both read the Hebrew Bible 10 times through and extract every report of every figure that was was at all like a spiritual effect, and categorizing those reports using the same categorization that I used in the DMT process, then starting to look for the differences, and then reading through the Bible like another half dozen times to start to extract what is the information content of this book, because in phenomenological comparison of the two states, the prophetic state and the DMT state are phenomenologically very similar. I'd say 90% overlap. But you look at the DMT effect, and it has clearly not had the same impact on Western civilization and the world as the prophetic experience as laid down in the Hebrew Bible. So I had to start to figure out, well, what's the difference between those two states? And the difference is the information content. The information content in the DMT state contained two things. One was the state itself, a description of the state, which the volunteers were very good at reporting. The state is like this. Certain things happen, certain things take place. It looks like this, sounds like this, feels like this. But the content, the actual, the information, the abstract, cognitive material, was pretty thin, relatively speaking. It was more personal insights, resolution of personal problems or questions. When it came to ethical or moral teachings, the nature of gods, the nature of how to interact with oneself and with the outside world, those were kind of elementary. They were kind of meager, relative to the descriptions of the actual content. So one way in which the prophetic, the fundamental way in which the prophetic and the DMT states differ is the content, the informational content, the meaning and the message. So that required going once more going through the text with a fine-tooth comb to extract the meaning, to extract the meaning and the message. So when you start to look, at the meaning, plus the message, the figures in the Bible all attribute it, to God, to an outside thing. Mm-hmm. It isn't all in your mind. It isn't, something that you come to. It's endowed, from outside, and the experience, plays out in your mind, and it's more real than real. That's another hallmark of the prophetic experience, is it completely sweeps away the ongoing reality that you're in and replaces it with with a dialogue with either God or so that was another.
Couldn't that be just a purely psychopharmacological thing that you say, okay, DMT just has the effect on our brain that things appear more real, that more real than real? So couldn't that be just a side effect of that particular drug?
Well, I'm, not, considering that the people in the text, in the, Hebrew Bible, took drugs, either plants or plant extracts. I'm more, banking on the role of endogenous DMT, that, DMT increases, within the human body and, mediates, the phenomenology, of the visions and, the voices of, the prophetic experience. I think once you begin to, postulate that the, feeling of the reality of the DMT state is purely a brain phenomenon, in a way you start to, you begin to, chase your tail. You begin to go in an endless loop. And, what I mean by that is if, this reality is given its, sense of reality because of a steady, trickle of DMT, which is endogenous, then what does that mean? Like, are there parts of the brain which, mediate the, feeling of, reality? In which case, you can't really tell if it's a, false biological, not false biological, but one of the things that, Dennis McKenna likes to say is that, that it's, is the whole, notion of it, of it all being chemistry. It's, like everything is chemistry. Our perceptions, our thoughts, our sense of reality. So I think when we're looking at the, source of the information that's, downloaded, we need to, take it at face, value first, and then look for underlying mechanisms that would refute taking it at face, value. Some people have accused me of slipping off of Occam's razor. Like Occam's razor is, the simplest explanation is usually the truest. So in this, day and age, Occam's razor is, it's your brain. But, back in the day, and when, not that long ago, Occam's razor was, this is what's happening. And let's just start from, that assumption. So I think, people, believing that it's just your brain or it's all your brain is a relatively, new, notion. And, up until maybe 100 years ago, there was a, sophisticated, or maybe not 100 years ago, but, Spinoza probably, maybe close to 300 years now, There was a sophisticated metaphysics, which was both a scientific and theological way of looking at consciousness and the natural world. I mean, even Descartes with I think therefore I am, believed in God and that God communicated through humans, through the pineal gland. So even a so-called stark materialist, like Descartes, was a theist. I mean, he believed in God and explained, consciousness and thoughts and perceptions through a sophisticated metaphysics, which didn't exclude God, didn't exclude spiritual verities. So I'm kind of the school nowadays that I do believe in an outside God who created our brain in order to communicate with us. That's the top down model, as opposed to the bottom up model, which is it's your brain. DMT is making the brain state that you're in feel more real than real. And that may be what's going on with a prophetic state that is occurring from the top down, is that DMT is mediating that feeling, but it's just mediating that feeling. It's the way that our brain mind complex is able to feel that feeling, even though it's one that has to do with and relates to an outside level of reality.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think so. So basically, your theory or what you postulate is that there is a higher being, there's a God, and that God is using DMT to communicate with us through our brain, or our brain was built to as a means of communication with that deity. And DMT is kind of the key to unlock it.
Well, I think that DMT is responsible, for the phenomenology, for example, of the prophetic state. The feelings and the perceptions, and the reality sense. But it's not responsible for the notions, for the ideas, for the information, which is contained in the DMT or in, the prophetic state. In which case, I think, that information is being, downloaded from an outside source. But it has to take some apprehensible form. It has to take some, form that we're able to apprehend, to perceive, to feel. It has to have that, that intensity to replace ongoing reality. It has to be, something that we can see and we can hear and we can, have an emotional, connection to. And, then the mind, the, cognitive, apparatus, the rational apparatus, the intellect, can then extract the information, from the visions. And, the information itself is from the outside. The outside stimulates, let's say, the elevation of endogenous DMT to give that information some form. And, then once you've got the form, you can extract the information and translate it into, verbal notions. Like it's interesting. And, some of the, prophetic encounters, let's say Zechariah, he's got these huge visions and, there's an angel, that's in the visions and he's just completely flummoxed. And, he says to the angel, what are these? And, the angel says, well, don't you know? And, so Zechariah says, no, I don't know. That's why I'm asking. Please tell me. And, then, so then the angel translates the visions into words that, Zechariah can understand and then, communicate to his audience. So, there's the intellect and, there's, the, what's called imagination, which is, the arena, the screen on which, the perceptions are played out. And, then, there's the intellect, which is able to extract communicable information.
But couldn't you make that case for basically any religion or any type of religious work? Can you say probably in Hinduism there were experiences of connections with beings and interactions with beings and experiences of different emotions? Because in your book you go through a lot of different emotions and different states of mind and different states of experience. And one question that I had when I was reading this was, okay, these are, I think, like joy or fear or being in an ecstatic state. This is pretty normal human emotional vocabulary in a way. And can you make the case for any religion? Can you say, okay, it might as well be, Hinduism might as well be one of the thousands of small religions that are out there. So why to focus on the Hebrew Bible or the Bible in general?
Well, for a number of reasons. One is that it's a Western text, and we can relate. It infuses Western civilization. I mean, our kids have biblical names. There's, Jacob and Isaac and Rebecca and Rachel and Sarah. And, the economy, philosophy, Western ethics and morality, architecture, aesthetics, economics, everything in, the West, you can, trace it back, to the Bible, politics, the nation state. Our, current, forms of government, in, the West are, biblically, focused and, derive, from, biblical concepts. I think, that the ideas contained, resonate, more with a Western audience than, let's say, an Eastern religion or a shamanic, jungle-based or native-based, religion.
But isn't it in a way biased towards then the Western audience? Because I guess that's Chinese people, put it this way, just pick an example. Chinese, they have a different culture, they have different religions, different philosophical beliefs, but most likely, and that's something I don't know, they're gonna have the same or similar experiences under DMT. So where does this connection then come from? I mean, where is their experience coming from?
Well, it's a completely biased perspective, but I think it's important, bias to to consider. Like, for example, if you walk into any head shop, do you ever see the 10 Commandments, or do you ever see a Bible, or do you ever see a statue of Moses or a Jewish star? No. You see Ganesh, you see Tibetan Buddhist bells, you see tankas, you see malas, you see the scripture of great wisdom. You might see Jesus, but I'd be surprised. Maybe a head shop in the South, but there's an incredible bias towards combining the psychedelic state with Eastern religions and shamanism, and an aversion, an instinctual aversion to relating the psychedelic experience, to the Western, religions, especially, Judaism. And I think that needs to be corrected. I think there ought to be alternatives to the jungle-based, native, indigenous, religious model and the Eastern model, which isn't available. One of the problems with my Prophetic States book is that it has kind of it causes a lot of people in the psychedelic community to bristle. Like they'll start to react to Zionism, the Palestinians, the punitive God, all those kinds of things. As a instead of taking an open-minded approach to the psychedelic state, if there's one thing that psychedelics are supposed to do, it's not close down your mind. And if you can't have an open mind to other ways of looking at the psychedelic experience, you shouldn't be taking psychedelics. You should be doing something else if they're going to make your mind more closed. So one of the things I feel is important about bringing a Western model to the psychedelic experience is that it provides a necessary corrective to the overemphasis on the East and on shamanism as ways to understand the state. And it's diffusing into the scientific community as well. Like if you read the book by Bill Richards from Johns Hopkins, he's the lead psychologist there, doing psychotherapy, and he wrote a book a few years back called Sacred Knowledge. Yeah, and he spends about 3 pages dismantling the Jewish prophetic tradition as a way of understanding the psychedelic experience. For him, it's the New Age. It's Vedanta, a Hindu philosophic approach, and some Christianity, but kind of a mystical sort of Christianity, and it's because of his emphasis on the mystical unitive state, which he deems superior to the interactive relational state. For him, the mystical state is the peak of the mountain, and the interactive relational state, the paradigm of that is the prophetic experience, is just the hilltops, the surrounding hilltops. So according to who? Actually, that's a question that I think is important to pose.
And you wrote a very long article about, or a review of his book, which is also published on your website. And you mentioned his criticism, and you also said that he's speaking in terms of Christian faithfuls in a way. But aren't you doing the same with your theory? Because even if you look at the numbers, like how many, what's the percentage of people of Jewish belief on the planet? Like 0.3, 0.4%. Then maybe take Christian, the Christian religion, which is quite close in a way. Then we're probably down to 1/3. But what's with all the rest? So aren't you making the same bias and saying, okay, spiritual experiences are inherently Western and rooted in this religion? Isn't that the same bias that you make? Independently of whether it's
well
valued in a certain way, but
not wanting to belabor the point, but there would be no Christianity without Judaism. So if you look at where did Christianity come from, and Jesus was Jewish.
Absolutely,
his, 12 apostles were Jewish. Paul was Jewish. So in a way, it is a way to be Jewish without being Jewish. That's my sense of a lot of Christianity. So if Yeah, and about one, I guess, there's a huge number of Christianity based religions out there. 50% of the planet probably. Islam. I mean, even though Islam discounts a lot of the narratives in the Hebrew Bible, it still is. It's still
rooted in a way.
Some ways, sees the Hebrew Bible as a precursor, as an earlier stage of Islam. So I think even the two other major Western religions are still quite related to, dependent on, influenced by Judaism. And I'm not necessarily making a pitch for Judaism qua Judaism, as I am for the interactive relational psychedelic experience or spiritual experience as compared to the unitive mystical white light religious model of religious or psychedelic experience. And when you look at interactive relational religious traditions, the one that has that I think has got the most mature, sophisticated approach is Judaism. It could be anything else actually, but Judaism has worked with the interactive relational experience more than any other of the other Western traditions. And I think there's a certain purity to to Jewish thought. If you look at the two main concepts which are transmitted in the Hebrew Bible, one is the golden rule, love your fellow as yourself, and the other is there is only one God. There is one God. So those are the two basic teachings of the Hebrew Bible, and those are very simple. They're quite pure. You can really, kind of use those in the fractalization of everything else. I mean, everything else kind of flows out of those two, basic, notions, and they're derivable from a careful examination of the interactive relational spiritual experience. Hinduism, you were, speaking about Hinduism, they have, gods, and, they have, deities and spirits which are able to communicate with humans. And, that's probably true. And they, and it's, believed and felt and experienced as true as well. But, like I'm an abstracting kind of, person. So I'm always, looking, for the highest, level of abstraction. What is the first cause? What's the original source? Where does everything start from? So if you have beings, if you have deities, if you have spirits, where do they, come from? Like, for example, when I was, I'm involved with, the Buddhist, community, we did, lots of bowing to statues and to pictures of, deceased teachers and bodhisattvas. We, prayed to them. And I always kind of, chafed against that. Like I thought to myself, I would rather, bow to and pray to the highest level, not, some, creation of the highest, so, I mean, that's, been, my, predilection is to, well, if, there is one God out of which everything else emanates, then I want to learn as much as I can about that one God, relate to that one God as much as possible, learn what communicating with that God is like, and, how to get the most out of it, those kinds of things. So, yeah. No,
go ahead. In a way, I'm by no means an expert in terms of religions, because I take a kind of, I'd rather agnostic state to it. I say I can, there's nothing I can prove, nothing I can disprove, and I don't even want to get started to wrap my head around understanding all this. But for religions like Hinduism, I've seen some very interesting, let's say, clarifications on the argument that there are multiple deities. And I saw one teacher explaining that it's actually not multiple separate gods or deities that you have and that you pray to, but it's in a way, it's also just one deity that takes different forms, and that takes several thousand forms in Hinduism. Some it might appear as an, I don't know, elephant, or to some it might appear as a different being or a different deity or multiple deities. But essentially, it's just there's one deity that takes the form that it needs to take to communicate with whoever it addresses. So I guess you might be able to make a point that there's just one big God or whatever it is that is there even in different religions. But I mean, the whole idea
your belief determines what you do, so and I think it's important to know in the front of your mind who you're praying to. Are you praying to one of God's messengers, or one of his angels, or one of the intermediaries lower down? Or are you praying to the Most High? So that's up to you. I think one of the dangers of focusing on the intermediaries is that you begin to treat the intermediaries as the first cause, or as the primary being. It's an easy thing to do. You deal with the messenger, with the intermediary, rather than the king. I understand the idea that there's one overarching, perhaps, deity in Hinduism, even shamanism, but it depends on, who you pray to and why. Mm-hmm. So I think in, that way, if you can keep the idea in mind of one God, it, simplifies things tremendously.
And in the context of the DMT experiences that people have, you've always talked about, and also in your books, you always talked about multiple beings that people encounter. So that would be intermediaries, whether you call them, angels or messengers or whatever. So that's DMT opens the way to the intermediaries in a way, not to the highest being.
Right. I think that's true. Yeah. The intermediaries are perceptible. And that's what, DMT provides, is a channel or a vehicle or, vessel, a conduit, a perceptible, apprehensible conduit, for what is, normally incomprehensible, imperceptible, normally invisible. Yeah. So I think, that the beings, this is another discussion, but, the beings, I think, are, coalesced information, in a way. They, provide, they provide a, perceptible thing that carry the information that comes from something that is imperceptible. One or two of our volunteers described a feeling of the one God, or an inkling or an intimation, but only in a it wasn't the most striking aspect of the effect. The most striking aspect of the DMT effect is obviously the content of that state, and to the extent that there are beings filling that space, then that's the thing that draws most of your attention.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you talk about cause and effect as a way to explain God, also in your, I don't know if it's the first or second book, but you mentioned that's kind of the ultimate argument, that there has to be some cause eventually, and you can't possibly go to that very first cause or the very last effect, because there is none in a way. So that's
so there isn't any that's comprehensible. Something which existed before existence,
mm-hmm.
like what created the Big Bang. That's incomprehensible. Mm-hmm. You cannot even imagine it.
Mm-hmm.
And what occurs after existence is over. What exists once there's the big crunch.
Mm-hmm.
That's completely incomprehensible, because our minds and our brains, they contain energy, contain matter, occupy
mm-hmm.
space, and those are qualities of existence rather than of non-existence. So I think once we start to look at what's before and after existence, it kind of breaks down. But yeah, the whole idea of, cause and effect was one of the ways that I first got my, toehold
mm-hmm.
into understanding God or appreciating God, or, realizing, that there is a God, because, Buddhism or, the Eastern religions, teach, that, cause and effect is the underlying, mechanism of existence. Everything which exists, has precursors. Everything which it will exist in the future is dependent on the present and the past. So, if everything like if everything has a beginning and a middle and an end, like a cause and an effect, then, what created cause and effect? So if, cause and effect, has got a beginning and a middle and an end, what, created and sustains cause and effect, and what exists,
mm-hmm.
And, what exists, what exists, like after cause and effect. If everything has got a cause, then, cause and effect has got a cause. And if everything ends according to, cause and effect, then, cause and effect ends as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, what, takes the place of cause and effect, what, created cause and effect, what contains cause and effect. So then I started to, think about God as, the creator and sustainer of cause and effect. And after, cause and effect is gone, or before cause and effect existed, there's God, which is an incomprehensible idea, but still, it's one you have to, kind of chew on. Also with respect to, cause and effect, they used to, they teach in, Buddhism, or at least, the Buddhism that I was, trained in, is that, cause and effect is impersonal. It just grinds away. It's like a law of nature. But, like the laws of nature, cause and effect encourages certain things and discourages others. So I thought, well, in a way, it's opinionated. It's got, certain things that are encouraging you to do certain things, and other things that are discouraging you. For example, if you are pissed off and disgruntled and thinking about hurting somebody, and you stub your toe and you go, ouch. I mean, that's built into cause and effect. And that cause and effect, mechanism discourages you from feeling anger, resentful, plotting revenge. So that, in a way, isn't completely neutral. In a way, it's a flavor. It's a specific quality of, cause and effect. So it's as if, the laws of, nature and, the laws of, morality, are both, they're both operating along a certain kind of, trajectory, which is, evolving into a desired outcome. So, I started to wonder, and still do, but I think I've got a, somewhat of a, handle on it, is, who's discouraging and who's encouraging. Why is cause and effect, the way it is? Why is, kindness, generally rewarded, and, meanness, generally not? So that must reflect the creator and sustainer of cause and effect, which in, the Jewish, model would be God. So you want to learn about what is God's nature, loving and kind and just, omnipotent, omniscient, atemporal, those kinds of things. And you could start to articulate those qualities through a careful reading of the text, which I think it provides.
I guess that's, the whole issue of God and the whole issue of what caused what, and what religion there is something that's, people have been arguing about, discussing for centuries, millennia, and even longer than that. But I want to go back to one quote you made several times in both of your books by one of your mentors, and that is, if so, so what? And with regards to DMT and with regards to the potential connection that we have to all this, then if so, so what? What's for us to learn if there's this pathway that we can access in a way?
Right. Well, but to get back to what you were saying about the nature of God and the nature of religious verities can be debated, and has been debated for millennia. That's true, but I would hate to see this psychedelic research field use or use the psychedelic state to advance one particular religious viewpoint, which I think is taking place now. It's dispensing with the interactive relational one, which is the Jewish one, and substituting or deifying or placing on the very highest level the Advaita, Vedanta, mystical, unitive religious model. There's no reason why the psychedelic community needs to come down on that particular side of the fence. I think it's a premature conclusion, and to just say the interactive relational state is low level is really it's a bad idea. I don't think it's intellectually sound. I think it's it's theologically suspect, and I think it's not responsible at a moral and an ethical level. To say psychedelics prove that the fundamental religious experience is X, Y, and Z. I don't think it really does that at all. I think it establishes that you can be influenced in your beliefs by the psychedelic drug experience, and depending on what your beliefs are, they become more certain. But that doesn't mean that other religious models, theological perspectives are not just as valid.
Okay, so what's the future for DMT research? What would you like to see happening in the next months, years, decades?
Well, if so, so what? Right? Yeah. Well, that was a quote from Danny Friedman, who studied psychedelics at Yale and NIMH, and at Chicago, UCLA. He was quite the guy. He basically believed that the best place for psychedelics was in religion, not necessarily science. But I'm not sure I agree with that. I think you can look at all kinds of applications for the psychedelic state. And if if you look at those applications, it's apparent that, psychedelics are closing in on the title of Panacea. They help OCD, they help depression, they help post-traumatic stress. They increase your appreciation for nature. They keep you from spouse beating. They improve your chances of staying out of prison. They're good for eating disorders, good for openness. They help your spiritual development. Yeah, they're panaceas. But if you look at, Charles Manson's group, which is an example I always like to, bring up. Charles, Manson gave LSD to his, followers, and they were, serial murderers. But they, came at the experience with a certain, set of pre-existing values and beliefs and personality structure. They were, sociopaths. They were violent. They felt, that, they were, taken advantage of. And they wanted, to get back at, society. So, Manson believed those things. He spun this strange ideology around them called Helter Skelter, which involved, race wars and, him and his, family coming out on top after the, race wars and stuff. And they, took enough LSD with Charles Manson, and those beliefs became cemented. They became their worldview, unshakable, convinced, and they went ahead and, followed through on their newfound religion. So I think any, drug which can affect such widely disparate results has got more going on than it's entheogenic, or it causes people to become serial killers. Nobody in the current wave of we has become a serial killer, and nobody in Manson's group became monks. So I think we need to dig deeper into what psychedelics are doing in order to maximize their benefit and minimize their harm. And I think if you look at these drugs as stimulating the imagination, and then maybe from the clinical point of view, stimulating the placebo response, as their fundamental effects, and everything else is a higher level structure that the placebo effect then works on. So it's like the lower level of the things that you see psychedelics do are centered on their enhancing the placebo effect. If you have somebody in a depression study, then the placebo enhancement will work on the antidepressant model that overlays the placebo effect, which is kind of stirring the pot. If you want to be a murderer, and that's your overlying conceptual, emotional structure, the placebo enhancement effect works on that. If you've got OCD, if you got stress, if you want to be more creative, the overlying structure, there ought to be some physical analogy you can make. It isn't quite like just an amplification, but it's more of the coming to the full fruition of inchoate or primitive, or hints or intimations of how you want to be, what you want to believe, the way you want your life to evolve. Those are the overlying structures which are worked on from below by the enhancement of the placebo effect, which I think takes place with, psychedelics, which would then explain the, panacea-like, property or properties that we're, seeing with, psychedelic research with these drugs now.
I see.
So it bespeaks, kind of an epistemological, can of worms, because it kind of is it's a way to start to deconstruct who we are, but I haven't really worked out that thread yet. But if the whole if who we are and what we believe is simply more or less active placebo at work, then we really have to start to look in the mirror a bit more carefully. And I think psychedelics can push us to looking in the mirror in that way, if we're open-minded about what they do. Not necessarily that they're entheogenic or they make you into a serial killer, but they reveal to us the nature of mind and how we relate it to to reality.
Mm-hmm. So in the context of the placebo effect, how do you see the current trends, so to speak, of microdosing? So taking minuscule doses of psychoactive substances to enhance ourselves without going through the full experience that a high dose would offer.
Right. Well, so microdosing is, like a relative term. Mm-hmm. You can take, very, very small doses, which are completely imperceptible. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't be able to distinguish them from a placebo. And, back in the day, there were some older studies giving low doses of LSD, to depressants, to depressed inpatients. And, they gave very small doses every day, and these depressed inpatients improved at the same time course that you would see in the case of antidepressants like Prozac. And the long-term pharmacological effects of Prozac and of LSD are quite comparable. They down-regulate serotonin receptors. So small doses of LSD, for example, mm-hmm. In a way, could be working, like Prozac, like an antidepressant. And there are some studies, giving, Prozac to normal, volunteers. These are older studies, and they demonstrated, some improvement in mental state, mood, performance, those kinds of things. If you're taking a small dose, but you're still feeling an effect, it can be like a nootropic, mm-hmm. like Adderall, mm-hmm. Or modafinil. It can just act like a mild stimulant, so you could be thinking more sharply, more quickly. You have some some novel ideas. So like in our DMT studies, small. The smaller than threshold, doses of the drug, were, psychoactive. And in some people, they like those, sub-psychedelic doses. Mm-hmm. They were stimulatory. One person described them as MDMA-like. One person described them as opiate-like. Mm-hmm. So you might be just kind of slightly buzzed on a particular microdose, like a couple strong cups of coffee with some sparkles added in. Mm-hmm. And I think once you start to, tip into the, psychedelic arena, once, there's, kind of the, whiff of a, psychedelic effect, I think you then start to, tiptoe into the activation of the placebo response. So you can maybe be more convinced of things that you wish you were more convinced of their truth, let's say. Or you can act in ways that you would like to act, more than you were before, because you're certain of them in ways that you weren't before. So that, I think, is, where you start to, drift into the placebo enhancement.
I see. You've met Albert Hofmann, the person who discovered LSD. Was it at a time when you were already in the process of this new approach that you discovered for yourself, or was it before that?
Well, I met Hofmann when I was on sabbatical in 1992. So I was about, I had completed the first study at the end of 91. And so I was going through Western Europe, meeting with, people, and describing our results. So I was still pretty hard boiled. This is your brain on drugs. And, I wasn't anywhere, near to, where I've gotten to since then. It was it was quite a fun afternoon with Dr. Hofmann. We drank tea up at his place. A couple other psychiatrists were with us. In his beautiful house, in his beautiful yard. So I have a question for you about Albert Hofmann. It's a very unknown piece of trivia. What is Albert Hofmann's wife's name?
I have no idea. Absolutely no idea.
Oh yeah, most people don't. I mean, everybody knows that Hofmann's first name was Albert, right? Yeah. But his wife's name was Anita Hofmann.
Anita Hofmann, okay.
Yeah. So Anita Hofmann made tea, and we mostly were talking. Well, there are a couple of things we spoke about that day. One was microdosing.
Oh, okay.
Hofmann was a keen fan of microdosing, like 10 micrograms, 20 micrograms, and he was also a big fan of one of his inventions, which was called ergotamine, which no, I don't mean ergotamine. Oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name of the drug. Well, not Cafergot. It might be ergotamine, but it was an ergot alkaloid, which he developed around this same time that he developed LSD. It may have been a few years later. Yeah, and it was a really good nootropic, slowed down dementia development and increased brain function, and it's still prescribed. It's called Hydrogene. That's the name of the drug, Hydrogene.
Okay, never heard of it.
And it's popular in Europe. I think it's included in some brain tonics that are relatively popular, and some people take it in the States as well. Yeah, so microdosing was a topic, and Hydrogene was a topic. Just besides politics and his his beautiful home and his great stories.
Yeah. So what's next for you? You have you're still involved in the Cottonwood Foundation.
Well, Cottonwood is mostly treading water these days. I started it maybe 2007 or so almost 12 years ago. But other groups are doing good work with respect to funding research, acting as fiscal sponsors. kind of working on the kinds of things that Cottonwood was, founded to, work on. I was just beginning to, write the Prophetic States book around then.
Mm-hmm.
So the main thing that, Cottonwood, did was to act as the fiscal sponsor, for the DMT documentary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We got a lot of, donations and, funneled them through Cottonwood
Mm-hmm.
as a, tax deductible thing. But, it's, mostly, lying, fallow these days. One of our ideas was to build a freestanding research institute completely dedicated to, psychedelic research.
Mm-hmm.
And it would include all, the disciplines which, touch upon and can be touched upon by the psychedelic state: anthropology, religion, economics, ethics, chemistry, pharmacology, religion. So, that has, not yet materialized, which, hopefully the dream or the vision of Cottonwood will help inspire other groups to put something like that together. But, like in terms of being, clearing houses for education and information, working as an activist or an advocate, funding research, groups like MAPS and Hefter and CSP, Beckley Foundation are all, doing that kind of work, quite nicely now.
Okay. And so what's next for you personally? Are you working on a new book or any new, anything, new movies, new books, new discoveries?
Well, I completed a large, project, mid last year. It was working as one of the 3 co-editors for a special issue of Frontiers in Pharmacology on, psychedelic and drug research in the 21st century. I was working with a couple other guys, Andrew Gallimore in Japan and Ed Frexa in Hungary, collecting, manuscripts and finding reviewers and working the manuscripts, through the review, process. So I completed, my, part of that work. It was about an 18-month project, so that, took a lot of time, and I, finished that this summer. And I'm, working on some autobiographical fiction. I completed the, first issue or the first, volume. And it describes that, year of being sick and kind of a humor, it's a humorous approach to near fatal illness. So it's my first stab at, fiction, which, hopefully will be going to the press in a few weeks. I'm, gathering up blurbs right now. Yeah, actually, if you would like to, take a look at it and think about endorsing it, I could, send you the PDF.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Please send it over. Would love to. And then I guess it will be published on your website, rickstrassman.com. There will be more information about this.
rickstrassman.com is my website, and I have a Facebook presence too, so you can contact me. See what's going on through Facebook as well.
Wonderful. So, Rick, we went on for quite some time now, 3.5 hours almost. So I don't want to keep you for too much longer, although it's really fascinating and could go on for hours. But there's 2 questions I always ask everyone that I'm talking to. And the first question is, this is a series of interviews with extraordinary people, and you are progressing the world and the humanity, I could say, with your research, but also with the thought experiments or with your research that you do. So who do you consider someone extraordinary?
Oh, right. You asked me that when we did our pre-interview. Oh, gosh. I didn't think about it. So who do I think is extraordinary? Extraordinary. I like Jordan Peterson. Mm-hmm. And I like Tim Ferriss. Mm-hmm. Maybe those might be the 2 people that just, pop up in my mind. They're hardworking. They've got their feet on the ground. They're really, pushing the envelope. They're really challenging people to be who they are to the ultimate degree, to bring, good into the world. So, those are the first two people that come to mind.
Wonderful. And so my last question to you would be, what's to anyone who's watching this or to anyone who's listening to this, what's your message? What's your most important message?
My most important message? Well, I would say it's the golden rule. I think that's the bottom line of, how to, treat everything out there, to love it as much as you love yourself, which is tough because a lot of people don't love themselves. So in order to, love things, they need to love themselves. And it's sort of, I think it has the capacity or the potential to be a very powerful, positive, feedback loop, to love your fellow as yourself. So, your fellow is everything other than you, which is close at hand.
Yeah. Rick, I thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. And I'm very interested what will come out of your research next.
Well, great. Yeah. Well, thanks, Rob. It was a pleasure. We really covered a lot of territory today.
Definitely. Wonderful. Thank you for watching. And in a few seconds, you'll hear about the extraordinary person that I'm going to talk to in my next conversation. But before that, I need to ask you for your help. See, finding people who inspire and motivate you to make a change, that's what's most important to me. But to connect you with these amazing people and to bring you conversations that you will not find anywhere else, I need you to become a part of our journey. So please get involved and leave a comment below with your own questions and maybe even tell me who I should talk to next. And if you know anyone who might like this conversation, then please share it because I'm sure that they will like it too, and it will help to grow this channel and to make an impact together. And by the way, on my website you will find all current and upcoming episodes, including show notes and transcripts, background info, books and websites of my guests, podcast links, and much more. And once you become an email subscriber, there is always some exclusive content, so don't forget to sign up, and I'll see you in the next conversation.
In the next episode, Rob talks to Charity Lee. In 2007, Charity had to hear from the police what no parent ever wants to hear. Her 4-year-old daughter, Ella, had been murdered. But that wasn't the only shock that day. The murderer turned out to be Charity's 13-year-old son, Ella's very own brother. Rob and Charity talk about how it's even possible to cope with a trauma like this, how it was possible to ever forgive her son, why she thinks that we as a society have an even greater responsibility to protect those who sometimes do the most harm to us, and much more. Join the conversation now.